All right. Thank you everyone so much for attending today. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Tom Levine, Cornerstone's Commission and Technical Specialist, and today we're covering two-step verification and data security. Specifically, we're going to be talking about why you're prompted to use two-step verification, what are the best practices for using it, and how to best use it within your organization. And before we really get started again, I'm sorry about today's audio quality. I have to do today's presentation from my home office, and there were some issues getting the computer over here set up to do everything that needed to be done. Unfortunately, that's why you also don't see my smiling face today, but I think we're going to get through it, and please forgive me for some of the audio ambiguity. Either way, I will go ahead and get started now. So before we jump right into things, just a few things to note. First off, housekeeping. If you have a question, please feel free to put it in the question box. That should be displayed to you kind of where the image shows. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation, but if you have something pertinent that I think is, a good thing to talk about in the moment, I might address it then. If I don't answer your question immediately, don't worry though, I promise I'll get to it. Speaking of that though, if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable putting in the question box or asking in front of everyone else, that's fine. Feel free to contact me directly. My direct line is up on the screen along with my email address, and we will show this slide again at the end of the presentation. So don't feel like you have to jot it down now. Additionally, I just want to mention Cornerstone's new AGB Portal. We have completely reskinned our site online and made it hopefully a little more easy for people to use, as well as expanding some of the overall compatibility and usefulness of the site. It is improved and launched on June 15th for all of our broker partners, and it's your one-stop shop for managing your book of business through Cornerstone, from carriers and client information to commission schedules. If you have any questions about the new platform or your access, please feel free to reach out to your broker advisor or the AGB support team. You can do that via the website link up there, www.crnstone.com/AGB, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now as well. www.crnstone.com/AGB. Also, one last note before we get going, don't forget that you could earn up to $7,000 with Cornerstone's cash incentive program. You earn more when you sell more. It counts for group, individual, and new business sales between January 1st of this year, 2022, and December 31st of this year, 2022. You earn points for each sale that bring you closer to a $7,000 cash prize. There are more details on our website, and I'd highly recommend you check it out. So that being said, let's talk about the reasons why people are implementing things like two-step verification and trying to lock down websites to make them a bit more secure. I thought it would be prudent to start with covering where the most prudent or costly exposure comes from, and that's leaks of PHI. That could be from a large variety of sources, and I've named three kind of big points up above. First, through criminal use and disclosure. That's when a criminal gains access to your system or to even a broker portal through things like social engineering or some other method, which we'll talk about here in a second, and then sells that information on the black market online. Now, that amount of money that they get from that can vary, and it depends on how much information they can grab, but it is something that you end up being responsible for. Additionally, threats from improper data handling or hardware disposal are also probably pretty common. This would be things like not fully wiping out your hard drive before you dispose of your computer when you store personal health information on it, or just a lack of encryption or software vulnerabilities that you're using. This is all, pretty basic stuff that most of us already kind of have ways to cover. Most of us have encrypted hard drives and make sure that all of our information is stored appropriately. But let's talk about some of the penalties for a minute of improperly stored PHI. Last year in our presentation with Connective Computing's Jeff Drever, we talked about fines ranging from $57,000 to $1.7 million. And that is true for most, small insurance carriers. But I thought I'd talk about some of the bigger fines that have happened in the last few years. The first one being Morgan Stanley. I think we've all heard of this one. They failed to protect personally, sorry about that. They failed to protect personally identifiable information, or PII, of current and former clients. And allegedly, their data center equipment was decommissioned by the firm incorrectly in 2016, and in 2019 was not efficiently wiped clean. A software flaw meant that unencrypted sensitive data was visible to whoever purchased that equipment. And they settled for the amount of $60 million from a class action with 2 different security breaches in 2002. So pretty pricey. Another one you might have heard of is Capital One. In 2019, they paid an $80 million fine for a lack of effective risk assessment when an Amazon Web Services software engineer obtained personal information from Capital One credit card customers who had applied for products, and this was due to a web application firewall vulnerability. The Office of the Comptroller fined Capital One $80 million for failure to establish effective risk assessment processes when migrating operations to the cloud from their personal servers, as well as failure to correct deficiencies in a timely manner. And for the last example, I just thought we'd reach a little bit closer to home. In 2015, there was an Anthem data breach resulting from several HIPAA violations that resulted in the leaks of names, birth dates, social security numbers, and medical IDs of their customers. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services fined a total for HIPAA violations that was resulting in about $115 million, in addition to the number that I have listed, the $16 million, resulting from a class action lawsuit to settle issues from this breach. But you don't only just face these monetary issues, you also face damage to trust and reputation from data breaches. So something to consider, and why companies like this are considering more secure methods of storing information online. Which brings us to the current method of security for online portals, password security. A lot of people think that a password is just something you type in to gain access to a website, and on its face, that's pretty true, but that's not exactly how these sort of systems work. When you set a password, you're just kind of setting a generic key. Think of it as like the code for your front door if you use a combination lock, or kind of like a key, honestly. You put in your password, but that's not actually what your database recognizes as your password. When you input your password into a login, your password is run through an encryption algorithm. Every website has a different one, but it's an encrypted key that's then matched to what's stored on the site's database. Basically, you put in your password, they jumble it up. If that jumbled up password matches what they have stored on their server, you're in. It's kind of oversimplified, and there are a lot of other methods to go about this, but that's generally how online security works. Pardon me. It ensures that only those with a keyword or specific numbers can access the account, and it prevents decryption of passwords if a site's database is hacked. So let's say that Anthem got hacked and all of their user passwords were exposed. They're not actually the passwords that are exposed, it's those jumbled up messes of letters and numbers that result from the passwords being input. And without the key used to decrypt those, then the logins are basically worthless. So it's a pretty good method of security, but it does have some weak points. Mainly these 3, phishing, social engineering, man-in-the-middle attacks, and spyware and adware. And if you're curious about more specifics on how these work, I'd recommend checking out our webinar last year that I mentioned earlier with Jeff from Connective. He is much more knowledgeable than I am about all of these different types of attacks and weak points in systems, and he did a very good job of summarizing that information. But suffice it to say that we can kind of summarize them here. Phishing and social engineering are typically done via email, or it could be someone calling in for information about you or your business. Typically, if this is done over a phone call, a hacker might say, oh, are they taking any vacation time soon? I want to make sure that I submit business, while they're there in the office, things like that. And they'll use that to kind of construct, okay, when will this person be in the office? When will they be gone from the office? when can I get in to, access their direct hardware? Or maybe they're trying to gain a generic password that you might use and try to break into your accounts that way. It's just using weak points in systems, which are people, and trying to exploit relationships between people to get access to sensitive information. Sometimes they'll even ask you to disclose private health information directly. If you're trying to log into Anthem and you call a technical support number and they ask you for your username and password for the site, that's a good cue that you're getting, socially engineered or phished. And no website will ever ask you for that information if they're trying to confirm who you are. So please don't do that. Don't give them your information like that. That's definitely phishing. The next type of attack is a man-in-the-middle attack. This sort of attack is where a hacker will monitor the web traffic coming to and from your device. Typically, this is done on public Wi-Fi networks, and it's because hackers can easily gain access to kind of see the overall traffic being conducted on those sorts of sites. This would be something like accessing Starbucks Wi-Fi without a VPN. This is where I mentioned VPNs. They do help that information, and they make sure that things being sent from your device are fully encrypted. So that's one common way of defending against this sort of man-in-the-middle attack out in the wild. Another thing hackers will do is if your lines for internet are above ground, they can actually tap into them directly, but that's really much less common. It's kind of paranoid to think about that. But it is an issue, and it's something that people need to consider. One of the big issues with this man-in-the-middle kind of attack is because they can see all the data being sent to and from your device. If it's unencrypted, then they gain access to your passwords and usernames because they can see what you're putting into sites. It's pretty scary, and if they get that information, then your login's compromised. So that's where the trouble comes with from this attack. And lastly, there's spyware and adware. Now, typically they use phishing or social engineering to install something like this on your PC, but it's a piece of malicious software, basically. So it's when someone will put something like a keylogger on your machine. And what that'll do is it'll log all of the keystrokes that you have for your device. So they could, maybe see, oh, they're accessing this website from a man-in-the-middle attack, and then from their keylogger see that, oh, well, you're on this site. You're entering a password, and that password is this, and your username is this, and then they have access to all of your client information through that site. So it's something to be aware of. Typically, this, if they have spyware or adware on your machine, you're already done. And a lot of people won't even waste time gathering that type of information. What they'll do is they'll actually put ransomware on your device. And what that does is it'll lock down your computer. You'll see a notice, something like, okay, I have access to your device. I've locked it in order to gain access to your data again, and, give me like $500,000 and I'll get you back in, and I won't sell your data online. If you don't give me $500,000, then I will sell all the data online, let everyone know where it came from, and get my money that way. And they're very vicious attacks. It definitely is something that happens, although it is much more rare nowadays with more sophisticated security procedures. It's just something to be aware of. That's typically where they'll go. They normally lock your keystrokes and go for personal health information. It's just a harder payoff, but it's something to be aware of. So with those sorts of hardware and vulnerability weak points, how does traditional security stack up? Well, let's talk about some of the ways they mitigate this risk online and why it may or may not be as effective as it could be. The first layer of security is security questions. This is something you've probably interacted with directly if you've ever forgotten a password. What it is it's something like, oh, what's your mother's maiden name? Or when were you born? It's asking you for a piece of personal information to access and reset your login for a website. It feels secure, but I just kind of want to go back to the previous issues here. And I'm going to go back a slide just to kind of show it one more time. If they're asking for your date of birth, that's vulnerable to social engineering. You might have accidentally given someone that information, or it may just be available publicly on your Facebook. You might have your information being monitored. And while you might not have typed in your date of birth into a site recently, you could have. And that would be where a man-in-the-middle attack is vulnerable. And if you have spyware or adware on your device, they already see every bit of information you put into your computer. So if you have any of the answers to these security questions stored on your device, then they now have access too. So security questions may feel secure, but if they have access to your devices, it's pretty vulnerable. Keywords are basically the same things as security questions. It's like just setting up another password. They have access to one password and they can see your history if you've typed it in before, then it's just as vulnerable as a security question. It can help direct people to specific areas of a domain if it's shared. So like a good example here at least is AGB Portal. They make sure you type in what area of their site you're trying to access before you log in. And each area of their website is locked down with separate usernames and passwords. A little more secure, a little bit helpful, but it's not exactly a great security feature. The next two, however, are actually pretty useful. The first is encrypted portals and encrypted websites. This is actually kind of the standard now, and it's something that a lot of places like Anthem, UHC, and a lot of other user portals have stepped up and started implementing. Even we here at Cornerstone use HTTPS. You can tell if a site that you're accessing is secure because in the web domain, that's the little URL line in your web browser, it'll say HTTPS before the URL. Typically, it'll have a little lock in the upper left-hand corner of that website. From that, you can tell if the web traffic between your computer and the site is automatically being encrypted using a public key. And if it is, then your communication is pretty secure. It means that any sort of like bank website you're accessing on, let's say, Starbucks Wi-Fi, all of the information being sent to and from the devices that are in communication there, meaning the site and your computer, are being secured. So someone trying to look in on that has a much lower chance of seeing what you're actually doing. It mitigates site traffic being monitored by man-in-the-middle attacks, but it doesn't help mitigate things like social engineering or spyware or adware being installed on your system. So it helps people from snooping. It doesn't actually help if those snoops already have access to your computer. And lastly is IP tracking and device recognition, which actually sets the stage for our actual main topic today. That would be two-step verification and two-factor identification. What IP tracking and device recognition does is it makes sure that only approved devices or devices that have already logged into a system have access to the site without verifying other information. I'm sure many of you have logged into UHC's website recently and been told, oh, hey, it looks like your device is new. Is this a personal computer? Do you want us to remember it? If not, then that's cool, but we're going to send you a code to your email, and you're going to have to put that in order to gain access to our website. What that does is it makes sure that you're logging in from a device that has access to your email account, and it makes sure that there is something else being input other than your standard password to make sure you gain access to the website. That's something called two-step verification, and it is much more secure than traditional security methods. Sometimes they might even give you like a ID or a site token that sends out this code to be even more secure. And that's where we get into things like two-step verification and two-factor identification, which is really the more secure way of accessing information online. And there is a difference. Two-step verification or two-step identification adds just another kind of step on top of inputting your traditional password to access information. It tends to work. It's kind of a more traditional approach. Websites have been doing this since 2010, and even sooner, actually, in the case of some banks. But it tends to work pretty well at keeping people out. Let's say someone does gain access to your computer and tries to access your banking info. If you have a key fob that sends you a password, a new one every time you log in, and they don't have access to that fob, then they can't gain access to your banking information because they can't input the constantly changing ID. It's pretty useful, and I think it works pretty well. Some other examples, though, of two-step identification that are not really as secure is just entering a company's NPN or user ID. verifying information like that, or maybe just checking a total of a deposit to access a statement. This is all information that you kind of already should have had, or may be available in your email if someone has access to your machine. So that's kind of a problem. Actually, that is something good to bring up, Kathy, so I'll mention it now. We have a question here, or more of a comment from Kathy, saying, I always need to do the two-step for every site despite having been to sites, sometimes daily from my desktop, even when I say remember me. That is something that a lot of sites are doing. Sometimes when you say remember me, if you're maybe signing in from a different device, or maybe you're clicking it, but then it requires like a second verification or ID to remember it's your computer. But that is something that people are doing to try and make things a little more secure and try to keep your client's information better protected. So yeah, absolutely. That's a great step of a kind of two-factor identification, which is what I was about to mention, actually, Kathy. So that is good. Two-factor identification is different from two-step identification because it ensures that you have access not only to your password and an email or something like that, but it secures information with something else besides a generic password. A password is considered a knowledge factor, by the way. Different factors of security include knowledge factors like passwords, possession factor. This would be something like a phone number or an email address. A biometric factor. This could be something like a fingerprint, or iPhones nowadays use facial recognition. So they scan your face, check your features, and make sure that your face at least resembles your face before they let you in. There's also different things like location factor, and some banks do use this. They might see, oh, you're logging in from Bermuda, but you normally log in from New Hampshire. That's pretty weird, and they might ask you to confirm something else a little further. And finally is a time factor. This would be something like when companies send out those emails with passcodes and say it'll expire in 5 minutes. That means that their password's only good for so long, and it's a good way to make sure that older emails aren't actually useful in logging in or accessing information. It's important to note that a lot of people use two-step and two-factor identification interchangeably, especially in the IT field. So if you hear two-step or two-factor identification, know there's a slight difference there, but most of the time people mean the same thing. So that being said, what might be the best ways to do this, or the best way to implement this, or use two-step verification? Well, I think there are two different ways to do it. For individuals, your second factor, in my opinion at least, should be something inaccessible from your work computer. It should be something like a personal phone line or office desktop that can't actually be accessed from software on your computer. I know that my computer here at work connects to Ring Central online. That means that my office phone number is connected directly to my computer as well, which means if someone, tries to call me, then any hacker who has access to this device would also have access to that incoming call. So it's a little less secure. That's why for individual logins, if you're running your own outfit, I'd recommend using a personal phone line, something just not connected to your work's network to verify information. Additionally, you might want to put in at least two different ways to contact yourself for the second step. That could be something like an email and a phone number that are not related to the company email or phone number. And the reason for this is kind of what I had already explained, but also it means like, let's say your phone number changes. You can still gain access to the login then without having to call their customer IT support or anything like that, because you have an email address that you could still access to gain access to site information. And lastly, when you're setting this up, verify that it works before moving on after setup. One other thing that isn't listed on the screen is I actually recommend not clicking that this is a personal device, remember me, when you log on to sites like UHC. And that's only if you're an individual. And the reason for that is because if they send you passcodes constantly to log in, then you know that if someone gains access to your computer, your login is secured. They're not getting access to your UHC login or Anthem login. It's something useful, and I think it makes things a little more secure. That said, for corporate accounts, this isn't as prevalent. And the reason for that is twofold. A lot of companies try to use one login for their entire, let's say, marketing department. Let's say you're having a bunch of agents write things under your personal ID. This isn't very secure, and I'd recommend changing it so they each have their own individual logins for the website and set it up like their individual login, like I recommend above. But if you can't do that for many different reasons, some websites don't let corporations set up multiple different users like that, then you are going to want to make sure you have a group login. What this means is that all of the two-step emails would go to a group inbox. For instances where our team over here has this type of thing, we use a general inbox and make sure a general phone line is on record for two-step verification. So if I'm, let's say, trying to log into a shared login, and let's say I shared it with someone over here like, I don't know, Aziz or someone else in our organization, I'd make sure that both him and I would have access to a single email account that could always get the push notifications from the website so that we could enter that information without having to contact each other. Just make sure that if one of us is out on a vacation or something, we don't have to bother each other. That's only if it's not viable to set up each of your individual employees with their own logins, but I digress. Anthem's actually very good about this, and since their data breach, they've maintained that every single person from a company has to have their own login for the site. And this is why. It makes sure that, if I'm logging into my Anthem login, I can input my personal phone information and gain access to Cornerstone's, general login information with my own credentials. It makes sure that things are a little more secure and I don't have to share information with other coworkers. So that brings us to kind of some of the issues of two-step verifications in a corporate setting. And I kind of got at some of these already. First off is inconvenient setup, or it's not always set up securely. For corporate environments, that's kind of a big problem. It might be set up to always go back to your boss, and then you might have to, constantly bug them. That makes it not always conducive to working in teams for accessing information. If one person's out of the office and all of their, personal email address info is used for the second step of verification, then, that means no one can get in either until they're back or unless someone reaches out to them directly. Creates a lot of potential issues, one of which being, concerns over who to contact to use the site. It also creates issues if a point of contact is disconnected, or let's say the person owning the login for your website is let go. That can be a problem in getting things reset because a lot of corporate entities will require to verify that email before they reset anything else. Now, there are ways around this, and the steps around that are normally reaching out to the company in question's IT department, and we'll go about how to contact them in a jam here in a second. There could also be issues in implementing a second identification factor, and typically this isn't on your end. This could be something like Anthem setting up really bad second step verification processes like, oh, well, we're going to give you a call and that call code will be available for 5 minutes to log in, but then they call you after 9 minutes and the login they're sending you is already invalid. So there are other issues. It's not always foolproof, but there are some things that are a problem with two-step verification that you should be aware of. So that being said, what are some of the ways around these problems? First off, if an email isn't coming in fast enough from the server, try logging in 5 to 10 minutes later. This would be something like trying to log in and getting the email 6 minutes after you request it, but that code was only available for 5. Typically this is caused by an influx of web traffic higher than normal. What that means is a lot of people are trying to access the website all at once, and that can cause delays from a server. My recommendation is just wait 5 minutes, wait for it to reset itself, and then try logging in again. That way you'll probably have a bit more luck. If you're having trouble with a geotag, or like, a company saying, oh, well, we only let you log in from, your office building that we see you registered at, try remoting into your office CPU. That's as simple as getting a VPN and using remote access. We covered that last year as well, But if you don't have that capability, then you might be stuck driving into the office or having someone at the office enter your information for you. If you have a new phone number, you might want to set up multiple forms of ID beforehand. That would be something like accessing a backup email address to reset your passwords and things like that, so that if you constantly have IDs going to your phone and you get a new number, you can reset that on your end without having to contact site IT department. Now, if you have a new phone number and you didn't do this beforehand, you can actually reset those on the company side. And my recommendation is to try to contact companies' traditional support lines. If a tech line isn't available on the site's web page where you're trying to log in, try it and create a new ID. Most of the time, a phone number or email address will be listed under there if you need help accessing it. And a lot of times that address is the exact same place you'd want to contact if you're having trouble logging into an existing address. So aside from that, that's basically why people are trying to use two-step verification, why it's a good security feature, and why a lot of sites are trying to use it. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in our chat. And as always, I will be sticking around a little bit after to answer any questions. So if you have anything to add or anything you'd like clarification on, now's the time. As always, I've been your technical specialist, Tom Levine. I hope you have a great Tuesday.